All right, everybody, welcome to our next video. And as you'll notice, we're not out on the tender on the ocean right now.
Because we woke up today and it was 33 degrees with lots of high wind advisories.
Yeah, even our dog was stuck underneath of her blanket this morning.
Yeah.
This is Ellie. Anyway, so we decided that going out on the ocean with all of that high wind advisories and the chop and the spray and the freezing cold weather was probably a bad idea.
Too much.
So we decided that we would rather stay warm. Yeah. And so here we are. But truthfully, we really don't need to be wearing all of this stuff.
Exactly. Because here at home, we have heating and air conditioning.
Right. And you know what? We want the same thing on the boat. And the reason for that is simply that we're going to be in places all over the world. Sometimes we're going to be above the Arctic Circle up in Norway. It's going to be freezing. Or we're going to be in the tropics near the equator. It's going to be hot. And if there's no wind blowing, then we're going to really want that air conditioning. It's going to be hard to sleep otherwise. So there are times when we need both. And in between those two things, we also need just ventilation in the boat. So it's a lot of airflow. This helps with mildew and also keeps us cool if we don't need the air conditioner and stuff. So good ventilation. So there's sort of two things that sailors will tell you. Number one, you can't have enough good ventilation in your boat. Pretty much everybody agrees on that. But number two is a lot of sailors will tell you that air conditioning isn't worth having simply because it's expensive to put on and it takes a lot of power and energy and it's constantly needing maintenance and it's another thing to break down. But we're going to go over both of these things and discuss why we want them. And we're going to start with the easy one that everybody agrees on, and we're going to start with ventilation. So let's get out of this clothing, and since the heater's actually on in here, and we'll move to the office and work on that.
In our previous Top 25, Part 2 video, we briefly covered ventilation and AC as item number 16 on our Top 25 Things We Want on a Catamaran. Here's a link to that video.
However, we want to go into more depth in this video and discuss some new options that we didn't cover in that previous video. Before we get to the new parts, let's recap what we did with our hatches and talk a bit more about the style and features.
Last week, we had a meeting with two representatives from Goyu to go over all kinds of things that we're purchasing from their company. Among those items are the hatches, portlights, escape hatches, acrylic windows, flip-up windows, and sliding doors between the salon and cockpit.
Let's begin the discussion with some talk about the hatches.
Sounds good. We chose to go with Goyu's new model, the Magic Flush deck hatches. All four cabins will have one of the new Goyu T44 Magic Flush hatch models, which is 20 inches square, which is about 512 millimeters. However, we decided to get rid of all hatches in the walkway up the sides of the boat. This is a safety issue for us. We don't want slippery acrylic underfoot, nor the chance to fall into an open hatch or just trip. Therefore, we removed all hatches from those walkways. But what does that do to our ventilation? Well, the forward cabins will have those 20-inch hatches that open on the forward-facing edge, so they will scoop air while we are at anchor. For better or worse, catamarans have a lot of windage and tend to stay pointed into the wind unless there's a very stiff current from another direction. However, we have moved the hatches for the stern cabins inboard to get them out of the walkway. This will cut down the amount of wind coming to those hatches since they will be behind the main bulkhead between the salon and cockpit. We think they will still get quite a bit of air, but perhaps not enough in some hot locations. We'll get to the solution to that in a moment. Before moving on, let's take a deeper look at why we like the Magic Flush hatches. These new Goyu hatches have a locking mechanism when the handle is pushed, and, even more importantly, these handles have a ventilation position while still allowing the hatch to be locked. That way, we can leave them cracked open even when we're on shore to allow ventilation, yet they're still locked. On the outside, the black hinges and winch handles are completely flush, while on the inside, Goyu put integrated stainless steel friction hinges, allowing the elimination of adjustable open stays. These hatches will be mounted flush on the deck for the forward cabins, with channels to let runoff water drain into the nearby lockers, which then takes that water overboard through the bridge deck. The stern cabin hatches will also drain through the bridge deck and overboard. Okay, so that covers the cabin hatches. Now, let's talk about the salon window hatches. We were going to put 4 of these same Magic Flush hatches cut into the acrylic window at the front of the salon, but Goyu offered us a new solution during our meeting. They have a new hatch that they will integrate into the acrylic from the factory. These hatches will be even more flush against the windows, and we won't have to mount them ourselves.
At our request, they're adding the same locking mechanism so we can leave these cracked open for ventilation, even though they're still locked. These save us time, money, and work, and will be nicer looking as well.
So, that covers all the hatches. We will also be adding 2 escape hatches under the stairs down into each hull. 2 of the steps will be removable in case these hatches ever need to be used to escape out onto the bottom of the bridge deck in the case of our catamaran being turned upside down. Now, we don't expect this to happen since according to Schionning Design, none of their catamarans have ever capsized, but we'll install them anyway, just in case.
Now, let's talk about port lights.
We added a lot of these to the design since we want extra ventilation for the hulls. We went with Goyu's Opal line of these port lights. The reason we chose that line is that they offer a very long model, the T04, which is 25.5 inches or 649 millimeters long, yet only 7.6 inches, 193 millimeters tall. So it will fit into the acrylic windows that go down the sides of each hull. And even though they are long, they only have 2 handles to open, where typical port lights of this length have 4. Each cabin will have one of these long port lights. There will also be one in each of the heads, though these will be a shorter version, the T01. These are the only ventilation openings for these heads, since we removed the 2 deck hatches. However, we won't be sleeping in the head, so we think this will do for venting odors well enough. The shower has its own port light, though it's even smaller, the T00 model. We couldn't put this one in the side acrylic window since there's a daggerboard casing there, but we placed it into the angled side of the boat, right here, where it's still out of the walkway. The rear cabins have 2 more port lights, one set between 2 of the steps up to the side deck, here, and one in the acrylic windows at the stern of the cabin. These are all the T03 model. That means that though the stern cabins won't have the main hatch in line with the wind, they do have 3 other port lights to open as well as an inset hatch.
But we're not done with airflow for the cabins. Remember the original statement, you can't have enough ventilation.
Recently, we were watching a video released by the O'Kellys. Here's a link. There was an older performance catamaran in that video that had tubes running through the boat, adding ventilation from a front intake. That was a great looking system, but we don't have the same locker style up front to collect the air for use by the tubes. However, there are other ways to achieve passive ventilation. Let me show you.
What SV Lynx does have is an angled side, which you can see here.
This is outside the walkway and stanchions, but above the vertical sides of the hulls. What we plan to do is design up a shallow dorade style scoop that will gather air flowing down the side of the boat and divert the air inside the cabins, but shed water down the outside of the boat. If you aren't familiar with them, a dorade box is a type of vent that allows air into the interior of the boat while keeping rain, spray, and sea wash out. The classic version of these look like this. However, that would be rather unsightly along the side of our boat, so we're designing a much more flush and nicer looking version. The principle is the same, however. When water and air flow inside, the air can circulate freely up an intake that goes inside the boat, while the heavier water will flow out drains in the bottom. The ones we are designing will be made to work on an angle since they would be mounted on this angled section of the boat sides. We modeled this one, and we can 3D print it out, then test it. If it doesn't work properly, we modify the design and print again, and retest until we get one that works properly before we print the rest for all the locations on the boat. These dorade boxes will scoop air coming down the side of the boat and divert it into the cabins and heads while shedding any water first. We are considering adding a few of these to the salon because even though we have those 4 big forward-facing hatches that can be left cracked open while locked, if we're on a passage and it's wet out, we'll want to keep those hatches dogged, but these dorade boxes would still supply some airflow without letting water inside the salon.
Same thing in the cabins. Even if it's raining out, those will add airflow to the cabins when the port lights and hatches must be closed.
Now, let's talk about the cockpit and the helm station. While you're sitting at anchor, the salon of a catamaran will block airflow to the cockpit, making it a fairly hot place at anchor in the tropics. To mitigate this issue as much as possible, we have added a barn door style slider that can be completely moved out of the way, sliding in behind the stairs up to the helm. Goyu is making that door for us. That will open up airflow between the salon and cockpit. But Goyu is also making us a flip-up window between the cockpit and the salon tables. This window rotates up and attaches to the cockpit roof. With that up and the barn door slid open, there's a lot of open space between the two areas. Now, while at anchor, those 4 forward-facing hatches built into the front acrylic windows will allow air to flow all the way through the salon and to the seating areas in the cockpit. Up at the helm station, there's another flip-up window facing forward. We chose to design a hard window here so that it was nicer to look through than something like clear vinyl. We'll have this down at the helm when facing adverse conditions, yet we also wanted it to be removable so that when it is hot or nice out, we can get the airflow from the front of the boat to the helm. This window also rotates upward on hinges and secures to the inside of the helm hardtop. There's a short, permanent window below. That had to be there so that the flip-up window cleared the winches at the line handling station.
Next, let's talk about enclosures. Both the cockpit and the helm station will have 2 sets of drop-down enclosures.
One will be an OC 30-gauge clear vinyl for when we are in cold areas or inclement weather. The other will be a screen for insect repelling, and it will add some shade from sunlight as well. We haven't yet decided about if we're going to go with a denser material to stop no-see-ums. The issue there is that it also stops the breeze. If that were the case, we could drop down the vinyl enclosures. The other option is to go with a mesh dense enough to stop mosquitoes, but not no-see-ums. This will still let enough of the breeze through.
If we're in an area with no-see-ums, we can spray the netting with wasp spray. That will kill the no-see-ums as they try to get through, but still allow some airflow.
More research is needed, and anyone who has suggestions on this, sing out in the comments.
So that's ventilation, but now let's discuss the elephant in the room, the dreaded air conditioning.
We agree that they add more cost, weight, and complexity, which means more work and maintenance, and even more cost than just the purchase price. We understand all that, and yet we want AC. There are just times when there's no breeze, and it's as hot as Hades, and there are too many bugs to sleep out on the trams. Or it's as cold as Prince Harry's Todger, and we don't want frostbite anywhere. In either case, we want to use our AC to cool or heat the boat. As a secondary benefit, AC is also good for cutting down on mildew, which is always an issue on a boat. So for all those reasons, we will put up with that list of negatives on SV Lynx and then try to use our AC the least amount possible. One good thing is that since we are a hybrid boat with a large lithium battery bank, we can run our AC all night off our batteries. This means we don't have to try to sleep to the smell of diesel fumes and the sound of a diesel generator running, nor have our anchored neighbors also annoyed by our noise pollution during our sleeping hours.
Sure, that will drain our batteries significantly, but we can run the generator in the morning after we and the anchorage are all awake or when we get underway.
When it comes to AC units, we're in the market for some 48-volt DC versions. This will cost us the least amount of energy since we won't have to convert to AC first or drop to a lower DC voltage like 12 or 24 volts DC. Each of those comes with a conversion loss.
If we can go right off our 48-volt DC batteries, then it's most efficient.
Unfortunately, it's been very hard to locate a 48-volt DC unit like we want. But we finally found one and are currently in talks with one company in Europe about a new option that looks very promising. They claim that the advantages of their variable speed technology are as follows. You get 50% higher energy efficiency compared to on-off units. They operate quietly and smoothly with low energy consumption. They also claim that there's no peak current when the unit starts, and they are very compact and light with easy installation. That all sounds great, and we've opened a dialogue with the company, but we need to get more information before we start touting them on our videos.
Still, they look promising, and we eagerly await contact with their representatives.
We'll let you know more about their units and company once we get more information. As for where the AC units will be located, we're still working on that. One option is here under the 4 beds, while another option is to put them in our storage lockers, 2 up in the bow, in these locations, and then for the stern cabins, we put one under the cockpit table here, and the other one under the stairs over here. Regardless of where we put the 4 units, we plan to use ducting to send the air output, warm or cold, to one cabin for each unit, or to the salon from all 4. During the day, we can close the vents to the cabins and open the vents into the salon, and do the opposite at night. That way, we only cool or heat the areas of the boat we are using at that time. Of course, if we have people sleeping in the daytime, they can divert their flow to that individual cabin as necessary.
So, that wraps up our discussion on our ventilation and AC.
I'm sure quite a few sailors will shake their heads at our decisions, but that's okay. Everyone has their own idea on how things should be on their boat, and they're the ones who must live with the outcome of those decisions. Maybe I'll regret the AC when I'm working on a broken unit, or maybe I'll want the deck hatch in the stern cabin if there isn't enough airflow. But I can add that hatch at any time, so we'll wait and see if I need it after I add my dorade boxes for added ventilation.
Next week, hopefully Mother Nature will cooperate and we can get to those sea trials on Traveler.
I'm very curious to know how much power the E18 supplies and for what range. Until then, I hope you enjoyed the discussion on ventilation and AC. It's not as sexy, but it is something that is crucial to the crew comfort on our circumnavigation. All right, well, we had some time, so I thought I'd take a few questions from our viewers of last week's video. So let's take a look at one of those. Ivan's Garage wrote, "The rudder box looks good, kick up, but if the rudder's turning or turned, won't it hit the hull and stop the kick up?" Well, the fact is that the width of the gap between the sugar scoop area where the box has to kick up is plenty wide enough, because a rudder really isn't turned that many degrees while you're sailing. And if it is turned more than that, then it's likely that your sails are trimmed wrong and you have weather helm going on, and so you really need to fix that, because a severely turned rudder means that your boat is trying to turn when you're meant to be going, in essence, straight. And you don't want to be offsetting the rudder to try to take care of what the sails are unbalanced. So typically you have too much main up, and you need to either put some more jib up or lower a little bit of main down, but you need to balance out that weather helm until you get your boat tracking more straight. Yeah, the objective being that your rudders are absolutely straight all the time. So that means that they will kick up just fine while you're sailing if you happen to strike something. So I hope that answers that question. All right, we have another question from Help Me Out. The construction of the canoes using composite strip planking raises the question, and I'll skip forward, typically an additional layer of double bias would be applied to provide off-axis strength. Well, you're pointing out something that I forgot to go over in that earlier part of the video. The thing is that after we've got the strip planking done and we've used stick and epoxy and put all the strips back on again, we are going to be putting several layers of basalt cloth over the top of the entire skin of the hull. So when we're sanding it, the edges of each of the strips might get worn down a little bit to the foam. That won't matter, simply because we're putting multiple layers of basalt cloth over the top of the hull, so that's all fine. And that was just a step that I skipped in there, and that will actually add a couple of weeks to that estimate. But I did mention the basalt a little later in that video, but earlier on I forgot to mention that. So I hope that answers that question for you. All right, well, that's a couple of questions answered. If you have any more, we always appreciate people asking questions and responding. And I don't mind a discussion on things. I don't know everything. I'm learning every day as we try to build this boat. And so, your comments, sometimes I have to look up the answers because I need to learn that. Or sometimes I learn something from your comments that I needed to know. And sometimes I do know the answer and I can answer for you, answer your question. So keep those comments coming and ask all the questions you want, and we'll both learn as we go. So I appreciate those comments and keep it up. All right, let's get to the end of the video. All right, well, thanks for watching this week's video. We really do appreciate all of your time watching our videos. And we also like to say a special thanks to our patrons, always. And just to remind you that all of the patrons get to watch all these videos commercial free, and plus all the extra stuff that we have in the patron crew only section of the website, like lists of all the costs for each item that we're building, many different things. So if you can afford it, then please join our patron crew. If not, still thank you.
And don't forget to like and subscribe and click on the bell icon to be notified of our next video.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.